tonight about discuss our annual board goals and discuss a process for adding items to the agenda. In 1.0, I'm calling the meeting to order, and now we're going to have a discussion under 2.0, and the first one on 2.01 is annual board goals. So I can start off, or if somebody else has some words of wisdom, I'd be glad to hear you. Okay. So I have taken the day as much as I could possibly to look at some annual goals of the past and of the Kent School District, as many as I could find. And I've also tried to look at other districts. And we also had a work session from WASDA come in and talk about our strengths and weaknesses as a board and stuff that we probably want to start working on. And one of the things that I found a few years ago in the 2009, in 2011 and around that period of the school board, it seemed like they had PowerPoints that were pretty detailed and a lot of goals. And I'm not sure, I mean, they look good on paper and a good presentation, but I'm wondering from former board members if you thought, because it looked like we kind of started to minimize those goals a little bit, or not minimize them, but take it down to a few other areas that we thought were potentially better able to meet. I'd like to hear a little about the history, if you don't mind.
Yes, we did in 2009 and 11. There were very many objectives there, board goals. But I think one of the problems we found, well, when I came in, we had, under Dr. Vargas, we had some ambitious goals also. I think that happened in I don't know if it was 2011, but we found that we weren't really following any of the goals because we weren't having regular meetings. And I think it fell by the wayside. Board members didn't even couldn't cite what our goals were. So there wasn't anything to remind us of what the objective was. And I think for several years, probably until 2016, we didn't have goals. We were kind of forwarding the previous goals or moving the goals forward, but not necessarily always addressing it other than the community connections piece. So I think it was 3 years ago that we actually had board goals that we voted on the 2018-19 year.
Mm-hmm.
And until then, it was just, there wasn't really any systematized way of following any of those goals. But the goals that we created in 2018-19 were basically to address our strategic plan, as well as look at our annual calendar, which didn't exist prior to then. We never really had an annual calendar. We've talked ad nauseum about it, but it never happened until that 2018-19 school year. So that's my
I think some of the goals too were set. I remember around our communication goals were set in response to some of the community response and some of the community concerns we had heard when we did our, we were going to our conversations and listening to what folks were saying. So we had set goals around, well, let me ask this probably. I guess, has everyone had a chance to review the goals that were in existence for the last ones that I remember were 2018-19? Has everyone had a chance to kind of look at that?
Well, our last goals were 2020, actually, that we developed, we adopted in May 27th. I do have the September 12th, 2018 goals in front of me too. And so, I mean, I actually, I mean, I don't know if anybody else did, but I've been studying all these this afternoon. So, And you know, it's funny because I couldn't find some years, and you've now answered that question. They just kind of.
Yeah, we didn't have any until the 1819 year was not formal. And the 1920, the ones, I believe I was absent at that meeting when you adopted May 27th, but I see that it's not significantly different from 1819, other than, yeah, I don't see too much of a difference. I think policy, communication plan, annual calendar, and evaluation and metrics monitoring were the 4 key goals. And other than some wording changes, I didn't see too many differences from the 2019 board goals that were drafted in 2019 with Vice President Daniels and I sat down and we worked out some goals for the new board, but that didn't happen until May of 2020 of this year that we adopted that with some changes.
Well, I mean, under the subtitles, we did formulate a subcommittee to work on policy. And we did add the WASDA timeline to board calendar. And I think you're right. Some of these are kind of a carryover. So I'm wondering if you think what you're thinking about. I have some ideas, but how do you see us developing and starting our annual goals? I want to hear from all of you.
Well, prior to this meeting, what I actually did, because I think for both our conversations on agenda setting and the other, I actually went back to my board boot camp stuff, and I went back to also that document that the superintendent sent us on effective board superintendent governance and collaboration on August 15th. And I went to our session last week, our goals and stuff. And so I think the piece before we even really start, you know, I know that Dr. Watts has brought this up too before, is just understanding our roles and responsibilities. So like I said, that's why I went back to the board boot camp stuff. And, you know, they've got some really solid things on roles and responsibilities. And so, you know, it's creating, reviewing, adopting policy. And we decide, the board decides what happens and the superintendent decides how it happens. So I guess, I mean, do we all have a shared understanding of our roles?
Well, I would say I'm clear.
Huh?
I said I'm clear.
Okay, so I would think maybe it might be valuable to hear what everyone thinks their roles and responsibilities are before we even start the goal setting, because you know that would help me. I mean, I've been going by what I learned at WASDA. So so could we have a little, like 5 minutes for that conversation?
Do we have to follow our agenda? Is that part of our agenda?
I mean, well, I feel like in any way to get to creating goals, we have to understand what our roles are to make sure we're creating goals that are actually under our purview. You know,
I'm not totally sure what you're trying to get at.
well, I just want to make sure that we're setting our goals as per what is our responsibility versus what is the superintendent's responsibility. Like I said, I spent a lot of time with that today to really look at it. And then I spent a lot of time with our board self-evaluation and where, you know, our lowest 20 items, which I have that on a spreadsheet. I think I did an Excel spreadsheet. And a lot of where I'm looking at my spreadsheet now, the lowest 20 things where we scored are in that standard provide responsible school district governance. And so to me, when I first saw that, after I did that earlier this week, it's like, that is, you know, that's, I think, where sometimes we fall short of understanding roles and responsibilities. And then our next biggest area where we scored lowest was hold school district accountable for meeting student learning expectations. That's where, and then the next two, create conditions district-wide for student and staff success, and then engage local community. But as I go through these 20, I went just back to our lowest 20. It's like community comes up again and again. So, I just want to make sure that we're actually all on the same page.
All right, we can take 5 minutes if you want to do that, and then we'll move on. So, let's start with you, Director Bowen. Do you want to lead us off? Yeah.
Sure. I mean, I figured what Michelle said was pretty basic. We are the superintendent decides how it gets done, and we decide, what gets done, and make sure that the things that we're approving, the policies that we're implementing really go with the values of the Kent School District and what our core values are as a board as well.
Anyone want to be next?
Well, I think the newer board members should go first. We have our own ideas. I'd like to hear.
Sure, I just wanted to give everybody a fair chance. I believe that, we are here to adopt policies and keep them updated. I believe we are here to be a vehicle to the community, to have their voices heard if at all possible. We are to have oversight over the budget and over, our short and long-term goals. And we are here to, actually work together with our superintendent to make sure that those goals and stuff are part of the community's desire and implemented. And we have one employee, and that's Dr. Watts or whoever our current superintendent is, and we are to evaluate and hire and fire the superintendent if necessary. That's the way I see it.
And then I'll go next. I mean, I've always gone with what I learned at WASTA boot camp. It's like primary responsibilities of the board. It's also in our policy. It's set the vision and the mission for the district, hire, supervise, and evaluate the superintendent, review, revise, and adopt policies, budget and fiscal management, serve as community representatives to the district and on behalf of the district. And then like I said, I kind of went back because that's always what I've been doing. And I just wanted to clarify. And so they state, at boot camp on the slides that we saw and I got copies of, we are responsible for the district's mission. So our mission is successfully preparing all students for their future. So keep that first and foremost. Then when WASTA talks about responsibilities from the strategic, this is exactly from the slide verbatim, from the strategic level to the tactical level, the board has one employee whom it hires, supervises, and evaluates. So I've always taken that. Responsible for setting policy, responsible for the district budget, and basically what you fund gets done is what I learned. And then monitor against goals set by the board and the community, monitor the what and how, review progress on a regular schedule, and ask questions. And then the last piece of it, community engagement, it has to be two-way. And we're responsible for serving the community we represent to the district and on behalf of the district. We're supposed to, like Director Bowen said, represent the values and expectations that the community holds for the schools, handling concerns correctly in the chain of command. So, first you go to, if it's a teacher thing, you ask people, to go first, through the chain of command until it gets to the superintendent or director level. So I guess that's what I've always, for me, I have this document and then this thing that, I can't even see, this thing that we got at WASDA, I have this on my desk all the time that I refer to. So for me, that's what it's always been.
Okay, anybody else want to chime in?
I think we're on the same page.
Anybody else?
I think you've You've captured it perfectly. And I think that's the reason why we're meeting today. That's the easiest part of this work. I think I will be the first to say this is some of the most challenging work that we will all engage in, setting expectations for ourselves so that the organization will benefit. And you've also said it well. As we think about our goals, President Hamada, we had a conversation recently about alignment of board goals to superintendent goals. I would also align my goals to the expectations of staff who report directly to me. So there is that coherence, that alignment from the entire organization, from the boardroom, as we say, to the classroom, to the living room. So I think we're on the right track so far.
Right. So, like I said, so then really what the board sets the what. So the board goals, from the board goals would flow, the superintendent goals then would flow your staff goals is really how effective organization works. And like I said, is that sound reasonable?
Well, I think to a point, I think,
Right.
I mean, to me that it can be similar in some of it. I think there's some of it that's directly should be kind of actually board annual goals that we are, expecting and anticipating of ourselves.
Mhm.
The strategic planning committee, I'd like to see them start to meet again because I think we're about done with our 5-year goals, if I'm not correct, in 2021, Dr. Watts, the blueprint, does it run out in 2021?
We've set 2016 to 2021. That's correct. So it is probably a good time for us to begin that process. But yes, 2021 is when our goals will not necessarily expire. We could certainly determine that they need to be continued, but it's time for a review. That's correct.
And I mean, I served on that committee. I found it very valuable for a vehicle for our community to relate to our board, to have their input into it. And I think not only as a superintendent, but myself as a board director, just speaking for myself, that we do want to have community input to what they're looking for us to do in somewhat, if it's realistic and in an alignment with what we're doing. So, I mean, under our old or 2019, 2020 goals, we did have similar on there. And I'm wondering if maybe we haven't hit upon something that we could agree upon so we can start to maybe actually get something in concrete today, is that setting our annual goals to revitalize or restart up or whatever you want to call it. And I know it's difficult under COVID, but we can certainly have virtual meetings and start developing a strategic planning committee for, would be 2021 to start up again and start hearing from our community on that. I don't know if that could be a board goal. I mean, that's one thing I see is using that vehicle as a communication tool. You can chime in. That's just my thoughts on that.
It makes sense to me. Before the strategic plan gets developed, that's one of the, I went back to my boot camp stuff. The board sets the vision, and then from that, the superintendent creates a strategic plan. And so, I agree, it's time for an overhaul, or maybe not, but it's time for a review. And so, yeah, step one would be the board meeting with the community to determine the vision for the strategic plan.
So that is is the way it happens. So I don't know what you guys, so the strategic planning committee that's what it's for. Community members, how many people do you have on your strategic planning committee, Dr. Watts?
We had dozens, I know, and Melissa.
Right.
But we got down to about 10, 12 loyal
No,
people.
I understand.
Well, yeah, you
Those
can't help who shows up, right?
Who are
Right.
on the listserv or the email string, there are at least,
Right.
I think, more than
About
50.
80.
Yeah, that's
Right.
right.
So
There's
what I
a whole
understood.
bunch. Yeah.
right. So that is the way that the community is involved in strategic planning, and with all districts that I know of. So it's not just up to the board or to the
Right.
superintendent necessarily, although the superintendent and school district personnel have the expertise to say, we do have to adhere to educational requirements that we have to do by law. So there's things that we have to do, but it's always been a collaboration of community members and other folks involved in that process.
Mhm.
Absolutely.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the strategic plan is the strategic plan. I think where we have to hear from our communities is what do they want to prioritize within that, and look at metrics that we want to follow and ensure that we are meeting, what we're saying we're meeting in those particular strategic goals. So I don't know, I always understood the plan was the plan, but how we get there is where we get community input, and make sure that we're monitoring what it is that they want to prioritize. So third grade reading,
Right.
third grade math, those were things that came from the community in terms of metrics, but that doesn't change our strategic plan.
Right.
Right. The whole blueprint you're speaking to, those were
Yes.
initiatives, current initiatives.
Right.
And so, I mean,
To Vice
we're
President
getting,
Daniels' point, that strategic planning process, that began from a community conversation, right? And so that would be the ongoing discussion. I know we've done it a little bit differently, but the community is at the core of that process.
so do I hear you saying, help me if I'm incorrect, that instead of just giving this to a strategic planning committee that starts meeting, we would need to have a general community meeting to see even if we want to use the strategic plan or the blueprint and continue with it or change it. Is that what I hear you saying, Dr. Watts, or am I incorrect?
I'm not sure I understood your question.
I'm not sure.
Let me help. So I think that
Yeah.
what it is we would need to convene another strategic planning committee. If we decided to make some changes or to reboot or whatever that looks like, you would convene another strategic planning committee
Correct.
comprised of the same people, community member, not necessarily the same individuals, but the same groups, community members, and you would begin that process of possibly reviewing the existing strategic plan and making changes or according to what some of the desires are.
Right. Based on priorities, exactly. And if we believe that some priorities needed to, and that's again based on the results, that's part of our goal. We want to be data driven and results oriented. So if we believe we've met or achieved a goal to a certain degree, we may want to change that goal. That's just a part of the conversation, but that would be a group team effort, that's for sure.
So can we make a distinction between goals and metrics and all these keywords? Because I think there's not a common understanding, and the goals are so broad that I don't really understand if somebody wants to change that particular goal or for strategic areas. What are we saying if we want to change, like having a premier workforce is one of our goals. So, I mean, are we talking about changing our goals, or are we talking about changing the metrics and how we go about meeting those particular goals?
No,
I
I
think the
appreciate
goals
that.
are pretty accurate.
Yes.
Yeah. So we need to be clear in the definitions here.
Right.
And you make a great point, because I want to make sure there's a distinction between our strategic goals for district and board goals, right? There should be, so I think we talked about that. They shouldn't be, they likely will not be identical, but they should be related in some way, right? There should be some connection, some coherence. But that was the purpose of the strategic planning process. Those four pillars emerged as the highest and most frequently discussed topics when I began my entry plan, which led to the strategic planning process. So I don't see, unless I hear differently or the community says something different, I don't know that teaching and learning, which is our primary focus as a practicing learning organization, two-way meaningful communication, which is a part of SEL and social emotional learning, organizational effectiveness, our systems and our structures, making sure they're operating effectively and efficiently to help us achieve our goals. And then 4, a premier diverse workforce is how we make this happen. It would be difficult for me to think that there would be any other goals that would supersede those or be more important than those. But to your point, Director Venkatachalam, I think the difference is, what are the metrics then, right? How do we help ourselves understand? Because the goal is where we see ourselves. That's where we want to be. So how do we get to the finish line? That's part of our work. Board's work is to say, this is what the finish line. This is what we want the organization to do or where we want it to be. Our metrics are similar to the KPIs. That's the key performance indicators. Those are those milestones along the way that help us see, for example, reading. That's where we receive the topic of on grade level for critical reading using the science of reading instructional practices by 3rd grade. Why? Because that's a research evidence-based metric that says when students are not on grade level, they're less likely to be successful. So that's an example of a metric that we would want to, we might want to include, but the goal would be to obviously to be successful at the next grade level.
So
Sorry,
excuse me. So to clarify,
excuse me, Director Bettinger, but could we not say in general, a board goal would be then to have continual communication with our community regarding input on the direction our school district wants to go in, something like that. A general goal that we as a board want to have a pipeline, so to speak, with our community to hear what their priorities are. The strategic planning committee could just be one avenue that we're using, and that could actually probably fall under communication, right?
Right. So the communication plan has that there already. So it has community conversations should continue in multiple formats, have specific communication plans. So yes, that's in the KPIs that exist for our goals already.
Yep.
Okay, but to clarify, that already exists, and that's under monitoring of strategic plan metrics done semi-annually. That was the intent of having, our strategic plan committee come to the board and let us know where we stand, on those strategic plan metrics. Unfortunately, there was such a small group, and I remember Melissa did several updates to the board on the strategic plan in lieu of, the strategic plan committee. Actually, I think strategic planning committee also presented to us on a couple of occasions. So that was the goal. That is number 2 on our goal 1, evaluation and metrics monitoring. So we already have that. So if we want to refine that, let's talk about that. Do we want to do it semi-annually? How do we want to do that?
So I wonder if one question would be, are we happy with the goals that we have? So I think the goals that we approved May 27th, are we, because I think they do cover a lot of the things that we've already discussed. And I think everything we've talked about fits underneath each one of these 4 places. And the things that Michelle read, all of it fit underneath one of these 4 goals. So should we my thought would be, let's just look at each goal. And if there's something that we see missing as a KPI or something, or that we want to put there, but I think if we just review the goals, I think we would cover everything that has been listed already.
Yeah, I'm trying to understand what is it that, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead and Director Bowen. Go ahead.
Oh, no, I just said, I was just agreeing with, I was saying, okay.
I guess I want to go back to something that Dr. Watts said. So the 4 pillars of the strategic plan were created by the community. Did you say that?
So the 4, what are now the 4 goals, came as a result of my entry plan when I arrived in 2015. And those areas that were most important, meaning mentioned most frequently, became based on the strategic planning committee and the process, became the 4 goals.
Okay.
and they were aligned with our work. That's how that came to be.
Okay.
And
And
there were also meetings with board members where
Absolutely.
we talked about our core values. And so there were several meetings, work sessions,
Yes.
or
And in
sessions,
exactly
BSGT sessions.
in our strategic plan as well, our board beliefs. So that's another conversation, maybe not for today,
Right.
but thinking about what is it that we believe is important to us. I can give you an example. So here's where alignment comes into play. I am having and will be having, spoiler alert, Melissa and I had this conversation today. I will be meeting with my team, and they will be meeting with those who report directly to them to come to an agreement on if we believe, first of all, our core values, equity, excellence, community. So if we are putting those values into action, what is it that we believe? So if this is what we value, if equity truly is what we value, if excellence truly is what we value, if community truly is what we value, what do we believe? So do we believe that all means all, or do we believe that some is okay? The other is not creating those belief statements, and the next statement is the commitments. So we have the next opportunity would be essentially, if this is what we value and this is what we believe. If this is what we believe, this is what we commit to. And those commitments show our actions that we will be measured by. So that brings us back to our conversation about goals. The way we can actually determine if our goals are ones we should continue, and Vice President Daniels, as you mentioned, or should we discontinue and come up with new ones, usually that comes about by asking the question, how do we do? Did we achieve our goals? Or did we get close to achieving our goals, or are we further away than when we started? I don't know if we have those data with us today, but that would be a line of thinking that I would suggest be a part of our goal setting process.
Well, under goal 1 is evaluation and metrics monitoring. And under that, there's 3 points. Superintendent evaluation meetings done semi-annually. And I do believe we met that. Is that correct?
Mhm.
Did that
Yes.
work out well?
I think that's going to be an ongoing,
Absolutely.
right? I think when we first started, was it semi-annually or was it annually?
It
I
was
think when
4 times.
no, before I got here, it wasn't. I remember when we decided it was going to be 4 times.
It was annually.
It was annually. Okay. So I think the semi-annually works well. But
So
yeah,
you're
it has
saying
changed.
4 times, meaning the meeting is 4 times a year, right?
What we found was it was too much because we didn't have data to support the metrics that we were looking at. So it was too much to meet to try and, because we didn't have a lot of the data. For example, if one of our KPIs are graduation rates or something like that, we don't have that data. We didn't have the testing data for students because it only came out at a certain time of year.
Okay.
So
I
it just didn't make sense to do it that much. So I think we decided after a year of that, we went back to the semi-annually, which I think it's appropriate. So.
Well, also we had way too many goals at that time. So I think, there's nothing wrong in having that discussion. Do we want more of those evaluations? But yes, the data needs to be there. And, we have to set the superintendent goals too, because it doesn't make sense to meet if we haven't set that first. It doesn't make sense to set the times if we don't know what those goals are going to be.
And we're already behind on setting those goals. That should have happened in July.
Right, but we are on track to do it now. So, that's where we're at today. So I'm wondering on that goal 1, if we can make an agreement that evaluations and metrics monitoring, and under that superintendent evaluation meeting done semi-annually. I wonder if, I understand that having the data and everything and metrics you need, but I'm wondering if it wouldn't be beneficial, and maybe this is just me because I'm a people person, but I wonder if we could perhaps just meet a little more regularly too, just to discuss how we're doing, Where are we going? How are things going? Not necessarily totally tied to every metric and everything. It's just like, hey, if we have a town hall and everybody had some interest in the SROs and didn't like this or didn't like that, I mean, as a board and a superintendent, we could just have a discussion. Did you think that town meeting went well? Are you having some particular issues in certain areas? I'm wondering how you feel about that. And
So
I want to
think
hear
it's-
from Director Bowen first here. I
Okay.
haven't heard from her much tonight.
Mhm.
I think that, just to like a check-in session is basically what you're talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing for everybody, but not have it be hours and hours.
Well, and to be clear though, that's not, the superintendent evaluation meetings are specific things where we actually go over the superintendent evaluation. What you're talking about is different. So I guess I just want to be clear
Yeah, I
that
hear
we're talking about two separate things. And to be honest with you, I don't know, and I know we've all been professionals somewhere, I don't know of anyone that's ever been evaluated 4 times a year. Or anyone that's ever been evaluated. I mean, I just don't know that it's an effective process and it doesn't accomplish, which we found out, anything that we were really trying to accomplish. But I do agree with definitely our check-ins and all of those things. But I think we need to be specific with, this is not, just a check-in is not the superintendent evaluation meeting.
Isn't that check-in the BSGT meetings? I mean, I like to
Yes.
think that's what that
We've used
is.
that in
Yes.
different ways. So I believe that the idea of a board superintendent governance team should drive, the focus based on the agenda, whether it's if it's a community conversation or if it's an evaluation process, or if it's information that's important for the board to know or the board to discuss. Those are all examples that we've used in board superintendent governance team meetings.
Okay.
The focus was really just that, to build more team. But I also want to be clear, I've heard our discussions about goals. We started talking about board goals, and then I've heard more of a shift to superintendent goals. Just want to be clear what direction we're.
Dr. Watts, under our goal, which was last, 2019, 2020, goal number 1 was evaluation and metrics, monitoring it. It has as number 1, superintendent evaluation meetings done semi-annual. That's what we're talking about.
I understand. Thank you. Thank you for the clarity.
So,
And you guys all do you guys all have this up? Because I could share my screen, or if somebody wanted to share their screen so we could see the goals that we agreed on.
yeah, I'm sorry, I'm just not that proficient.
Yeah, I have it in front of me. So
And when we talk about informal check-ins, President Hamada, I mean, I don't
That would be
know,
great.
those are more to me,
Yeah.
it's like most leaders, when they have their one-on-ones or their two-on-ones with an employee, that's when they touch base on the goals and say, how are you doing? Do you need any help? Are you struggling with anything? Because then if you're doing that consistent monitoring, then you have the opportunity to, see if a goal is even realistic or not. Because sometimes you see, partway through the process that some goal is just not realistic given the circumstance or given whatever. So typically that's what the focus of a one-on-one or just a meeting, that's typically what the focus would be, is, check in on goals and then other business.
Can you guys see it?
No.
Oh dear. Okay. One moment.
are you able to share, or does Pam?
Well,
have-
it says I can, but if you guys can't see it, then that means I'm probably not.
There it is. There it is.
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
okay. Awesome.
Thank you.
Okay. Let me make it a little bit bigger. So that way we can kind of see what we're talking about. Is it big enough for you guys to read?
That's perfect.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. No problem.
Thank you. I just don't know how to do that yet.
It's okay. I've had lots of practice.
Haven't trained myself how to do that yet. I'm afraid I'd lose everybody. Okay, thank you. So, again, anybody else have any thoughts on this?
On goal 1?
Yeah. And we were just on actually number 1 underneath it.
Well, I guess, you know, focus on those words that we use, like monitoring, you know, is monitoring a goal? So there's a question about some of these, because when we set, these were the same goals as we had in 2018-19. Nothing changed there except it's semi-annually. So back then, the question was, there is a strategic planning committee being formed, and do we want to hear from them and sort of monitor through them these metrics, making sure that it's getting met in coordination with the superintendent evaluation. So we're now in a phase where that committee is not meeting. And so do we want to be more specific about what is it that we want to see with the strategic plan committee, you know, as a goal? So I'm questioning the word monitoring. Does that apply at this point in time?
No, it doesn't. And also we're under very different circumstances as far as I can understand about strategic plan and everything. But back to number 1.
No, I'm talking about goal number 1.
Goal number 1 is evaluation and metrics monitoring. And under that, number 1 is superintendent evaluation meetings done semi-annually. Should we keep that in place? Or should we, do you want to X the whole goal and label it something else and word it something else?
I'm good with that.
I think it makes sense.
Goal 1, KPI 1 makes sense. And then looking to number 2, like Director Vengadasalam brought up. So I do think it's important to measure the strategic plan metrics or review. So personally, I would prefer to keep that, because I think, you know, the strategic plan is supposedly the overarching framework under which all the business gets done in this district. And so, you know, reviewing that semi-annually or reviewing that annually, as the case may be, there should be some review and report of all the metrics of that in some capacity, whether it is the strategic planning committee, which did not meet at all last year to my knowledge, for the 1920 school year. But I would just change the wording perhaps, because I think it is very important.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, don't we, before we start to monitor, don't we have to get it going again, you know?
So it's still in place. So the strategic plan is in place through this year. So it's not done, right? So I think but I think the thing is, are we talking about, it says monitoring of strategic plan metrics. So what that means to me is, okay, the strategic plan has spelled out these goals and these metrics. So it's up to us to monitor that via when we have our reports, right? When we have the staff do reports on student performance, when we have the staff do reports on discipline, because those are all parts. When we have the staff do reports on hiring and recruitment activity, all of that is a part of the strategic plan. And so we're monitoring it when actually it's being shared with us, it's being reported to us. So we are doing that. But I'm wondering if you guys are reading, I'm not reading this to say anything about the strategic planning committee. I'm reading this to say the strategic plan has metrics and it's reported to us, which is how we monitor those metrics.
Right, but serving on the latest strategic plan committee.
So it'd be the development of a new committee is what you think maybe we should
No,
have?
what I'm saying is the metrics that we used on a lot of stuff, we are in a whole different situation starting right now, even the evaluation process, because I mean, how can you measure discipline when kids are not even really in classrooms?
Well, once they come up with
what are you going to compare it to? You know?
Well, when they come up with a way to do it, because the reality is the district has to come up with a way to do these things.
Just like
So
the
they
10%.
have to do it. So once they develop the process of what it looks like, then we would be responsible for monitoring that process. So
But then
whatever it is they come
you'd
up
have-
with.
You'd have to have this committee up and running and going and looking at all that to develop a whole, new systems and metrics, wouldn't you?
Well,
So-
I don't know that the committee would actually do that, because the committee is not,
No, I'm not saying for the state or how they're going to do it. I'm saying for our district, because if we're saying, that we want to improve here, what are you going to compare it to? Because this year is going to be totally different.
Well, I think that's a good question to ask. And it's also, if we do nothing, then we won't have anything to compare it to. So that's the dilemma. But the reality is we're going to have to create some metric by which we measure our performance. And I think that's where I think we're on a line between the what and the how. So staff and team are going to be working on the strategy to make sure that our goals are met. And I think that's the question that I want us to also consider is I've heard a couple of our board directors ask this: do we need to keep the goal or do we need to change it? The goal reads evaluation and metrics monitoring. So in other words, the goal is to monitor evaluation, performance, and metrics, whatever those may be, obviously driven by the strategic plan.
Okay.
If we're monitoring those, is that the goal? And I guess that would be the question, because a goal, as we talked about before, it must be smart, right? It must be specific. So is that specific enough? It looks like those 3 KPIs would be examples that would support evaluation of metrics monitoring, but that's not the only metrics that you would monitor as a board or we would monitor as a staff. The other question is how is the monitoring going to be measurable?
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. Yeah.
So there, one strategy for effective goal setting is to forecast and say, okay, if we are proud of the work we did, what would it look like? So at the end of the year, like when I look at this evaluation and metrics monitoring, just throwing it out there. So superintendent evaluation meetings done semi-annually, that's really not measurable. That's not a SMART goal. But if I say, okay, what around the superintendent evaluation process would look amazing and I'd feel so proud of it by the next year? Because really, high-performing districts do the superintendent evaluation piece very well. That's one thing Tricia didn't mention at our last week, but when I reviewed my notes from that session I'd gone to before, that's one of their top things. So if I look at that and I say, okay, at the end of the year, if I felt really good about what I did, then I might say, okay, superintendent evaluation done, with SMART goals and new goals set by June or July or whatever. It's like I would feel comfortable with the process. I would be happy with the process if, hey, the superintendent's goals had been SMART in the first place. So, this might be just the superintendent evaluation piece of it could be just one goal with several KPIs below that, because just that's such a high level overview. But to do superintendent evaluation or any employee evaluation with fidelity, you have to achieve collaboration on the SMART goals. You have to monitor them. Then you have to hold the meetings, and then you have to review with fidelity. And, so it's all these goals are very fluffy and not super measurable, and they're open to interpretation. And that's where I struggle. I like goals that are very specific and that at the end of the year. So if in the interest of transparency, if a community member looked at these goals, there would be no question we had achieved them or not, because they could say, okay, this goal is so specific, measurable, actionable, relevant, and timely, and which makes it very understandable so that, we and the community, there'd be no question we achieved it.
So you're saying instead of saying semi-annually, put an actual time frame in there for each of the 3 KPIs.
Yeah, that could be
Or
too.
seven.
That could be they're conducted in March and June. It could be, the superintendent, you could be, you have your goal setting by July, completed by July 31st. You have your first measurement by such and such a date. You have your second measurement by such and such a date. That at least gives a measurable that is time bound, focused. You can look at it. You can say, oops, we missed it. We missed that deadline, or we didn't miss that deadline. We made it happen. And
So do I hear you saying, Director Bettinger, that a time frame of those would meet that specific enough to the community that you sense?
well, the not necessarily. The end result is you've got to ask too, is why do we have this goal?
Okay, give me an example of what would be a specific sentence there then that you think would work.
Well, like I said, superintendent evaluation would be one goal with the measurements and KPIs underneath it.
But that's what we do when we set, that's not here. That's when we set the superintendent goals. So that does happen. I think you're wanting to be way more specific than we would be here. So I do understand what you're saying though about saying, okay, so superintendent evaluation meetings done by, whatever, November of whatever year 22, and, or what it be, January and June or whatever that looks like. But I think that the evaluation process is where you're talking about all of those individual goals is not here.
But we have to agree also, and it's as a board, we have to agree we have to agree because the superintendent's goals last year weren't SMART goals. And so, if it's our goal to have SMART goals for the superintendent, then if goal 1 was superintendent evaluation, and then the first KPI was we set dates. We have the goals by, well, now it's October 21st. We have goals completed by October 31st. We have the semi-annual evaluation. So we have the dates set. So that would be one goal and metric we could meet. The second metric could be, that all the goals are SMART goal. All the goals that we collaborate with the superintendent on are SMART goals, that are specific, measurable, action, la, la, la. And so that could be another KPI. And then we could look and say, did we do that? Did we create SMART goals for the superintendent in collaboration with the superintendent? Because it should never be done in a vacuum. It should be done in collaboration. And then, at the end of the year, did we meet those, did we meet those deadlines, those 2 deadlines? We created SMART goals and we set a calendar for achieving those, achieving the pieces of the meetings. We met our dates, our timelines. It's, semi-annually, we could do, semi-annually is so vague. It could be, we could have one meeting in May and another meeting in June and say, yep, we did it.
No, but the intent of that was to make sure that there were metrics that could be met. I mean, when we talk about testing and graduation, we have to look at mid-year and end of the year. So it's not to say that we would meet, May and June. And so if we want to get into those kinds of details, we can. But I guess I'm trying to understand. I do understand that the goal should be achievable, and I think that makes sense, that it should be SMART goals for the superintendent. So saying something like superintendent evaluation meetings will be done semi-annually with the intent of having, of setting SMART achievable goals for our superintendent. And you mentioned about timelines.
Right. Because this piece, superintendent evaluation meetings done semi-annually, it misses the piece about setting the goals. So it's like, really, superintendent evaluation meetings, it's a rolling process. July should be when we set the new goals because they're fresh in our mind. And then it's a rolling process. So to me, we've already not done a great job because it's going to be the end of October before we even set the goals. And the time period we're measuring is July 1 through, June 30th. So again,
So
in transparency
Well-
and in goal setting, it's like anyone could look at that and say, did they meet that goal? Yes, they set the goals. That's goal number 1 is to actually create the goals. Or KPI number 1 is we actually create the goals by XYZ date that are SMART measurable goals. Goal 2 is we hold the evaluation sessions by whatever dates. It leaves no room for interpretation. It's just, did we do it or did we not?
I feel like if we expand that sentence, we don't need to have like several other KPIs underneath it. And that's where we get into trouble because we don't, it's just too much for us to evaluate. So just by saying the superintendent evaluation meetings will be done semi-annually with achievable goals, that will be set up by July 1st for the upcoming year, something to that effect.
Mhm.
Where it's one sentence, we know exactly what we're going to be doing. We're not getting into the details. It'll be done semi-annually, but with achievable goals, and the goals will be set up by July 1st for the coming year. For the coming school year, something like that.
Is anyone taking notes?
I am.
Okay.
So I don't know, how do you feel about that? Or do we want to set up, several KPIs?
I feel fine about that, but we're going to have, then we already accept that we missed one of our measures.
Yes, we did. Already
Yeah,
accept
so
that.
We
we
missed
have to
one.
accept that,
Yeah, we
So,
can't do anything about that. So yeah.
yeah.
Okay, so can we agree to do one sentence? And I want to have it very clear that we all agree on that sentence under goal 1. And I'm going to read it back to you and see if that's acceptable to everyone here. Superintendent evaluation meetings done semi-annually with the intent of meeting SMART goals by July 1st for the coming year.
Mhm.
It's actually setting, we have
Setting,
we're
yeah.
setting SMART goals by July
Yes.
1st.
Yes, not meeting, setting.
A meeting setting, okay.
So
No.
no.
Change meeting to setting goals, not meeting the goals.
Okay, now, okay.
Can you read it again, Leslie?
Okay.
I was gonna say, I might be able to type into it.
So superintendent evaluation meetings done semi-annually with the intent of setting goals, setting achievable goals by July 1st for the following.
Actually setting SMART goals, right? They're
That's
SMART.
what- yeah,
Not
smart.
achievable goals. Yes, SMART goals.
Yes.
Setting SMART goals.
Do people know what SMART goals are?
Yeah,
It's-
a lot of
it's
people do.
specific, measurable,
Yeah,
actionable,
say
relevant,
it out, and
timely.
we're going to put SMART goals.
Mhm.
We can all make sure that's a glossary or a term, make sure
Yes,
everyone
thank you.
understands what that is. Sure.
Mhm.
That's easy.
Are we doing specifics tonight? I mean, this is it and we're writing it down and, I mean, have we? Let me, I'm sorry, but if we're going to do this and we're going to get it done, I want to get it right. So forgive me. So I'm going to read this back to you. Superintendent evaluation meetings done semi-annually with the setting of SMART goals by July 1st for the coming for the next coming year.
Coming school year.
I think school year, but yeah, I think that works.
Okay. Now, if I can read my writing, if I ever have to type this up again. All right, we've got
Some
one done.
video.
It is on video. That's true.
Oh, that will help. I forgot about that. All right. All right. Okay, so we got one down and miles to go. Number 2. Where were we on the discussion of that?
Monitoring of strategic-
Do we want to keep monitoring
I think so.
monitoring of strategic plan metrics done monitoring of strategic plan metrics done semi-annually? Do you want to keep it, throw it out, or adjust it?
I think we should
So-
keep it.
I think we should monitor the strategic plan. So I think we should keep it as a goal. But again, to make it, to Vice President Daniel's point, if this is something that, we're constantly getting updates on it from staff during board meetings, then it might just not be semi-annually, but regular monitoring of strategic plan metrics at board meetings or something like that.
Through reports to the board or something like
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
Yeah,
I agree.
because I want to be clear, this strategic plan metrics is not something that we expect staff to bring.
Right.
It was supposed to
That's
be
right.
the committee that's supposed to bring it.
Right.
And so if the intent is changing, the metrics are not something that the staff regularly gives us information on unless we have an expectation for that.
So
So-
how do the committee members get that information to present to the board?
No, what I'm saying is that there are several presentations that come to the board, but it doesn't always necessarily address the strategic plan metrics that are there. It might in general, but I don't know how specific we want to get. Do we want to get to the point of addressing specific strategic plan metrics, such as our students will be at 3rd grade reading level?
But we get those. So that's what I was saying. So I think you're talking about the who's doing it. And I guess this doesn't say who's going to do it. This just
No,
says
I'm
that, okay, because the district does provide reports with strategic plan metrics. Not that they have to, but I'm saying that I don't read this to say that the district has to do it. It's just through board reports. So whether that's the strategic planning committee doing the board report, or whether we're having a discipline report or a hiring report or whatever that looks like that addresses some of the metrics in the strategic plan, I don't know that it's necessarily you need to say who's doing it. It's just that we're getting those, which we do get those reports all year.
Yeah,
And
we
it's
have
also, that is
Yeah,
a
but
part of our
I
process.
think it's
right?
very generalized.
Sometimes
is.
it's not though.
Yeah, I don't think it's
It's
specifically.
it's pretty generalized.
I would disagree. Some things are quite specific.
Okay.
Are you speaking of number 2?
Yeah.
Still? Okay. So
Yes.
I wonder, and again,
Yes.
going back to the what
Sure.
and the how.
Mhm.
So we are always monitoring our data. So
Right.
whether it's through vision, our dashboards, our data dives and meetings. So I guess I want to make sure we're going back to if the board is evaluating the what, and staff is responsible for the how, if this is the board goal, that goal continues to be met through our review and constant monitoring of our data dashboards. But we could obviously how would you know that, right? And so that's based on reports that we share during the board meetings. That could be updates from team or from me sent to you via weekly updates. So there are other strategies to make sure that you get that information. That's the how. But you would determine if that goal was met. Monitoring of strategic plan metrics done, I would say obviously at least semi-annually, which is technically at least twice a year.
Mhm. Yeah, I think addressing that specific strategic plan, I think that's the important part of this, not in general terms, but
Yeah, the metrics,
addressing
absolutely.
those specific metrics
Right.
that the community is working on.
What about adding something in there like monitoring of strategic plan metrics done semi-annually, presented by individual plan groups? I don't know, it kind of gives it a little bit more specific, but doesn't go into exactly every single part of the strategic plan that's being reported on.
So technically, the end goal is by the end of the year, the board would have gotten a report from whatever source to understand the metrics of the full strategic plan, whether that be through the discipline piece of it when we get the discipline reports, whether it be through perhaps a superintendent goal, whether it be through the strategic planning committee. But at the end of the year, if we had achieved this goal, we would all feel confident that we understood the metrics and the measures of the full strategic plan. Is that what the goal is desired? The end result is desired?
I mean, yes, and I would add, I think one of the things that I remember discussing was that the strategic plan committee wasn't so much that they're presenting versus the district presenting. It's making sure the metrics that they're working on is being addressed, because that's the concern. So for example, the parent survey that kind of went around in circles, and I don't know what happened there, but that was one of the metrics that they wanted to see. We wanted to see it. It was part of the evaluation for Dr. Watts. So we want to get an update of where we're at in those kinds of discussions. So that was one of the reasons that this particular goal came to be. And so I don't know if there are so many reports that are presented by the district. Yes, that would cover some of the strategic plan, but hearing from the group would kind of address the ones that are of community concern. And so that's how I understood that goal.
Okay. So
I might offer go ahead, Director.
If I'm hearing you correctly, by the end of the year, you would have wanted her to have heard from the strategic planning committee semi-annually.
Semi-annually, yes, on the metrics that they were working.
So really then this goal to make it more specific, and so at the end of the year, if that's what the desired outcome at the end of the year, that yes, we succeeded, then that would need to be clearly in there, monitoring report by the strategic planning committee done semi-annually, if that's the desired end results that we achieve by the end of the year.
So I wouldn't think that. My thought would be, again, we're monitoring the metrics of the strategic plan because that's what we're supposed to be doing. So if we have, like we talk about, hiring practices, creating a premier and diverse workforce. Well, how do we find out about that? Because they share with us the demographics of hiring and all of those pieces. So I think that I like saying the strategic plan metrics because the strategic planning committee doesn't always report on all of those things. Mm-hmm. So I think I think we're kind of overthinking. It doesn't have to be as specific. It could just say monitoring of strategic plan metrics done by board report, regardless of who does it. I mean, if you want to be specific around it could be by board report, and strategic planning committee. I mean, whoever's reporting it to us, it's being reported. Yeah. So that
it's not who's reporting. It's what is it that the community is working on that we need to kind of see that is coming to the forefront. It's not getting set aside and the district is presenting various information, but is it addressing everything that the group is bringing forward? So it's not whether they bring it forward or the district brings it forward. The question is, are we addressing, yeah,
Right.
what
Okay.
it is that they're concerned about. So in looking at the details of when we first set this 2018-19, it says, of reasonable progress to meet the strategic plan metrics
Right.
of the school year. So that was supposed to be 4 sessions originally.
Mhm.
So we narrowed it down. So yeah, it doesn't matter who presents it. It's, are we addressing what's being discussed at those meetings?
So I'm hearing two.
They're two different things.
I'm hearing two different. So I'm hearing two different but good
Yeah.
outcomes. So again, looking to like at the end of the year, if we were really pleased with how this happened, I'm hearing that we would have had a report from any source. So the one thing is we would have had regular reports
Anybody?
from anybody.
Yeah.
And the strategic planning committee would be involved to help us monitor and address any quick fixes or change or monitoring anything that needed to be addressed quickly or before the end of the year. Did I get that right?
Well, are we addressing what the strategic planning committee is bringing forward as,
Right.
to meet those metrics?
Right.
So I guess this was giving some weight to the group, what is it
Mhm.
that is of importance that's being discussed, and is the
Mhm.
board monitoring that progress, of what's happening with the committee? So that was the original intent of that. But I don't know where it's gone
So
now.
it's almost 2 KPIs because there's 2 separate pieces. There's regular reports, which, I agree with Vice President Daniels. At the end of the year, if we had gotten through various means reports, and I feel like the calendar is set up to do that, to give those regular reports.
Yes.
So if by the end of the year we had received reports from any source on all of those things, that's one piece of it. So that every goal and metric was reported on by the end of the year. And again, that's another thing. Is it the end of the school year or is it the end of,
It's always the school year.
okay,
Yeah,
end of
school
school
year.
year. So
Always
that's a
school
good
year.
thing to know too.
Yeah.
Then if and then the second piece of it would be, the strategic planning committee once or twice reporting to us. So there's 2
Yeah,
separate.
that's now how we're
things
going. So we know what the committee's working on, what they're finding
Mhm.
is important.
there. Mhm.
I think that was really the intent. That was really important to have that committee report to the board.
So should we add that as a 4th, or just maybe put a comma and then as well as the strategic planning committee reporting to us semi-annually or something like that?
Mhm.
Well, quite frankly, I think being on the strategic planning committee, we developed our plan and then we presented it to the board. By a lot of the metrics we didn't even have until the end of the year, to even report on how that was doing. What I think is important here is you see some kind of evaluation process where you're linking things together. I think in monitoring the strategic plan metrics, I think if we had some kind of color code coordination or something of like that, this was a board goal, an annual board goal, this is a superintendent goal, and this was a strategic planning goal. So you see red, yellow, or blue, or whatever. And as we go through that and that happens, you see the link between all the systems that are coming together to achieve our goals. That's how I see it. And again, the strategic planning, serving on it, we did the metrics. We weren't there to monitor all the time what went on with those metrics. We were there to set them, come back and see how we did, and start over again on the next year. That's the way and we had many, many meetings. And those meetings were very, very valuable, even though the population that attended them became less and less as we went on.
President Amana, I appreciate your saying that. And I want to remind our board that it's important for us to talk about metrics and monitoring those. Just as a reality check, there were nearly 100 metrics involved in the entire strategic planning process. And I would say if we were going to even attempt to monitor good, bad, or indifferent, I don't know how realistic that is. So one way that I would offer, and certainly as I think about my goals and team goals, is really to prioritize. So what is it that is most important? And that's really where I go back to our 4 pillars, those 4 strategic goals, the goals that support teaching and learning, the goals that support how we get along with one another, two-way meaningful communication, SEO, the goals that support how effective we are as an organization, systems and structures and processes, and then how effective we are at ensuring we attract, recruit, hire, develop, and retain a premier and diverse workforce. Those are the 4 main goals. And metrics, that would be a challenge, I think, for us. Not impossible, but I just want to make sure that we understand the reality of that. There are, I think, 85 to be exact metrics that are in our current plan.
Are you speaking to the ones that we identified as
Just
in
total. Speaking of
I'd
total.
have to look at that again, but I thought we were much more precise what we were asking for in the current initiatives. Are you sure about that?
President Hamada, there are 21 priority initiatives that the
Right.
Strategic Planning Committee
Okay, that's
identified, but the strategic plan that is still in place through
Yep.
21 has
Overall,
overall
That's
85.
that's
Yeah.
but that
what I
was
was
one of
sharing.
the reasons for having a current committee that year or the next couple of years, we were going to focus on those. So that takes it down to, 20, which in itself is a lot to manage, but I
Correct.
thought that was part of the reason why we were there to prioritize that for the current school years. So
I appreciate that. I heard us speaking of metrics and wanted to make sure we were.
not a problem. I thought that many we did. I don't remember that. So anyway.
So we would probably need to be specific. That's why I said, do we want to change the wording and,
Right.
monitoring of specific strategic plan metrics prioritized by the group? I don't know how we want to do it, or do we want to keep it? Or do we would just want them presenting twice a year?
I mean, keeping track of the strategic plan is of utmost importance. I think there's, a plan is only as good as how you use it and how you measure it and make sure it's working.
And just
So-
let me talk as a community member on these boards, and I'm not alone. You've all served on these different various committees in different capacities, but I think one of the things that I found frustrating and heard from other committee members was that we were just checking a box and we didn't even really get to report from Core 24. And I think, and I'm just saying things come up and this is a fast-paced environment. I'm not talking about what has happened in the past or blaming anybody. I'm just saying in the future, if we can be true to our word to say we're going to have our strategic plan or our Core 24 report once a year or our family task engagement task force that I was on that suddenly dissolved after Brad Brown left and there it was. We have to be sustainable and we have to be intentional on a deadline to do that. That's the way I look at it, to make our
Okay.
kids really feel like they're heard.
Okay, so a review and monitoring of prioritized strategic plan metrics done semi-annually.
I like that.
Did you say that again?
Review and monitoring of prioritized strategic plan metrics done semi-annually by the strategic plan committee.
I like it.
Okay, we're done. Nice.
Now we can all go home, right? We are home. That's the problem. All right.
The third one will be easier.
Wouldn't count on it. Okay.
Should.
Progress monitoring of the board. Oh, that sounds like that's great.
There you go.
Does anybody have a problem with number 3? Sarah, shh.
I would, yeah, you know me, I like specifics. I would like dates, just a month, you know?
Okay, so mid-year,
Yeah.
mid-school year.
Yeah. So that would be,
So progress monitoring of the goals semi-annually mid-year?
So mid and end of school year.
Mhm.
Is that not good enough?
Mid and end. Okay.
Just for your reference, FYI, as we're having this conversation, I know it's good to have context as well. If you've not taken a look at the information that was presented to the board September of 2019, thank you, Melissa, for placing that in the chat. So that's there for your reference as well.
I missed that.
Okay. Presented in. Oh, okay. Alrighty. Shh. Quiet. No.
Here, I'm just eating.
Right. You
Yeah,
have,
thank you. I appreciate that, Melissa.
okay.
You're welcome. Sorry, I was muted.
Okay. All right, are we on to goal 2? Do we want to add anything to goal 1? I guess. Anybody have anything they want
I
to
don't.
add or to discuss further with goal 1? These are important. We want to get them right.
do we want to add anything related to the COVID or anything? Because when I think of the thing I most am concerned about monitoring, it's right now, it's enrollment and attendance, you know, so does anyone else have any interest in having that on here to keep an eye on?
I think I think we do get that information. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I don't know that it necessarily needs to be called out because they have done an amazing job of keeping us in the loop of all of those things.
Is there any specific wording that you're thinking of? I always have to see.
I know. Not necessarily. And it might be something more for the superintendent's evaluation.
Right. I don't particularly see adding that myself, Director
Okay.
Benjamin, but
Yeah, it's probably more for the superintendent's evaluation.
okay.
And I was even looking at the strategic plan to see if that falls under anything that's in here. But I think you guys are right.
All right. We're on to goal 2.
Yes,
Do we want to have a communication plan?
Yes.
we have one and we
Sure
haven't
do.
reviewed it in a while and it's changed. Sorry, go ahead, Dr. Watts.
No, I was just saying we do. I was just responding to that.
Yeah, we have one, but it does need to be reviewed. I mean, obviously things have changed. We don't have community conversations like we did.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, we can.
Is there any reason we couldn't? I mean, just do it virtually.
No. I
Well,
mean,
it's there
Renton
though.
did it
That's
at town
number
hall.
3. That's number 3 on there.
All right, that's-
Right.
Thanks for keeping us on task. All right, number 1. Overview how communication is working with staff and community. Is that an important thing we want to keep doing?
So again, what
Language.
is the measure? How do we know we succeeded?
Okay, so I do need to make there should be some clarity here. This goal was developed by 3 of the new board members. I believe Vice President Daniels and I were gone because the original one we had was to develop and implement an effective process to respond to questions and so forth. So this is something that you all created this number one. So I guess I don't have any comments, but I'd like to know what you were thinking when you developed it.
Honestly, personally, I don't know, but could you repeat but I do like what you said before. Developing a plan to respond to community. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I mean, we had a bunch of things under that. You know, we said BSGT, our board superintendent governance team, will review and revise our board and district communication strategies in order to develop and to implement an effective process to respond to questions, concerns, comments, or feedback from citizens. So that was the thought exchange, you know, that happened with that. That was part of the discussion, which I think you changed that to have metrics, specific metrics for communication plan. So a number of things changed there. There were a whole bunch of things under that communication plan that we had before. But, so I don't know what that number one is necessarily addressing. Maybe the one where we said carefully consider community and staff input in its decision making. So that was one of the things.
And that's number one, I believe, Director Bettinger, was how you wanted that worded, and you didn't like the wording of the other one. If I remember.
Yeah, I can't. I'm not remembering it. I'm not denying it. I'm not remembering it. I don't know what. Again, this is my own fault for not looking to the end result. I mean, when I think about communication, my biggest frustration, and I think I see it in the emails we get, is, you know, people saying, I've written to this person, and this person, and I didn't hear back. So, you know, so the idea of developing a plan to respond to and answer constituent questions from, you know, any format would be a desirable outcome for me. So at the end of the year, so for me, at the end of the year, I knew exactly the process. If I needed to forward something to the superintendent, like we had a written process. So if it was something that was the superintendent's responsibility, I would know that I sent it off and that it was, you know, either addressed or not addressed. And if a constituent came to a board meeting and asked a question, I would know at the end of the year what the specific steps were being taken. I would know that, oh, it goes into the meeting notes and then it gets answered by the appropriate team and it gets placed on the website, or it gets mentioned during an old business section of the agenda. So coming up with a plan to respond to our constituents' questions and concerns would be very desirable.
Well, let me say on this, I would like to see that that we have some kind of a system in place. And I think, to me, this has been kind of frustrating, is that sentence says that, to me, that, and I don't think we can put staff and community in that same sentence and what I had in mind, but when I'm seeing emails, I try to use the hierarchy to send it on to who is responsible for it. But I would like to see something like, again, I like things linked and I like closure, or I like to see if a chain that I can follow to see what's been happening. And if I, can send this on to that person who is in charge of staff operations and procedures, I probably know that person got it, but I want to know from that person on, what happened with that, and I know there's so many things that are going on, but if we just had somewhere we could go to and find out that problem was corrected or taken care of or addressed or finalized, and the people may not be happy with the results. They may be very happy with results, but if I, as a board director, or any of you that have things that come up in your your area and you bring it forward. If you could see, Mrs. Jones had an issue about this and we sent it on, and then we know what happens going forward with that. And then we know the end results that, hey, it's been taken care of in some manner. Maybe they didn't like it, maybe they did, but we have a finalized type of system that we know that. I mean, is that unrealistic to ask of implementing something like that? I've got a file of things that I just put in a file that people write, and I try to go back and see if they were taken care of, but sometimes I'm not even aware of where to go to find out if it was taken care of.
So I feel like, the question of do we have a communication plan makes me think that nobody's looked at that communication plan, the board communication plan. So I wonder if we should sort of review that first and then come up with, what we want for our goals, because that's pretty detailed, that plan. And there are things that are going to change, based on our current situation. But some things may not change. So do we want to review that and modify that, and we can address, some of the goals within that?
I'm sorry, I guess wasn't even quite aware we had a board communication plan.
Absolutely.
And where to find it.
Yes, Director Bedger, wonderful question. And I think I can help you with an answer. And thank you, Director Venkatasalam. So 2018-19. And I've said this before, I will remind all board members, every community member, internal staff, oftentimes the question that you're asking and the information you may want to receive, 92% of the time, I'm just kidding. It's highly, I'll just say the information that you are asking for, try our website first. So that information, our comms plan for 2018-19, including annual goals, the board 2018-19, that information is on our website. I can certainly send you a link, but I offer that as just almost a one-stop shop. And if you can't find it there, certainly let us know if you have trouble navigating. But I offer that as one way, because I think Director Venkatasalam, I appreciate you sharing that, providing context, because the plan is fairly comprehensive. It is probably one of the more comprehensive plans that I've had the opportunity to be a part of. I appreciate Melissa Larmy's expertise and our team. But it's not just about communication from our communications team or from the superintendent's office. Everyone in this organization is responsible for communication. And that's how we created our plan and our process for. So,
and we held 4 sessions, I think, in the school year to go through that last year.
In 2020?
Sorry, 2019.
Yes, the 18-19 academic year.
So do we have an effective, did you develop and implement an effective process to respond to questions, concerns, comments, or feedback from citizens?
We did.
And where is that written? I don't.
Yeah, I can't tell you exactly where that is. We were responding to community members on a daily basis.
Right, and we were responding on the website. I remember, so there was a process for that. So yes, and that was all in response to concerns of the community. So they were, the community was key in us developing that communication plan.
Yeah, all those questions that came from the community conversations, we would come back and we reported at the board meetings. Melissa would dictate, she would note it on the website and with all the answers. So
we happened. Still do that? That's still happening? When people ask questions at board meetings, it's still happening?
If there is a question, we do. It's been different in this COVID time, but we still have the ability to do it, yes. And we did change our website since then, website format, but happy to continue with that process. But there was not, obviously we don't have a communications plan in place with this board.
Yeah.
So.
So that's something we should,
So maybe
We've
we
talked
should
about
review that,
Right.
review that, and then come back to this
Mhm.
in another work session, this particular goal.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I'd like to, and it sounds like we should have updated this probably in 2020 to 2021, right?
So it says develop and implement an effective process to respond to questions, concerns, comments, or feedback from citizens. So does that also include emails? Because that's one of my biggest challenges is, what to do with emails when it's really not the board's responsibility, it's the superintendent's responsibility. So what's the written plan for email communication?
Can you be more specific, Director, when you say when you receive email communication or? help me
Yeah, I
understand?
mean, the board gets a lot of emails that go to Kent board, and sometimes
Right.
they specifically also email you, but I know you get the Kent board emails as well. So, that's another form of communication. So again, if someone writes to the board, I guess I assume that it's being handled because if it's an operational item, but we should never assume anything. So, so there, does that mean what I'm reading on the website here? Does that mean there's a written plan for how we handle emails?
So the
We have
president, it's in our
clearly-
protocol.
Yeah, it's in our protocol.
The president is responsible for responding to any emails that come to the board. So it is in our protocol.
But we haven't finished our protocol.
Yeah, but that part we did.
That's there.
Well, I fully understood that. What I haven't looked at this communication plan, to be perfectly honest with you.
Mhm.
And I honestly didn't know. That sounds funny, but I think if we would have had something that said a checklist of all the stuff we needed to do in 2020, that would have been helpful to be on there to make ourselves familiar with that.
With all due respect, President Hamada, we had in the Goal 2 draft that I provided to all of you before you set the May 27th or 2020 goals. Goal 2 communication plan clearly states that we define the impact of our communication plan. So there were questions there about the communication plan that came up during that conversation. So, you were aware there was a communication plan, obviously, because it's in our, it was in our goals, and we detailed it out, in our goals. So I do have a concern about when we say we didn't know about this, or we didn't know about that, because there was no onboarding. These were all laid out in our goals, in our board goals. So the fact that we didn't follow it, I think we need to just say we didn't follow through on it, but it's not that we didn't know, because it's there in writing. So anyway, that really bothers me when I hear that everything is attributed to an onboarding when it's clearly in front of us. So I'm sorry, I have to say that.
No, that's fine. I hear what you're saying, but perhaps in the bigger picture, it's very clear to you when you've been at this for a while, but it wasn't clear to me that was all. I could go to all that and find specifics on it. And I guess when I'm looking at 2018, 2019, I figure it's out of date. So,
Well, no, I mean, the summary that I provided to you, the summary I provided to you clearly says have specific metrics for communication plan, and you all changed that. I mean, it's actually in here in the new one as well. So, I mean, what communication plan? I would think that would have been a question. When you put something into your goals, you say, well, what is that communication plan? So one exists, and so, yeah.
Should we then change it back to what it was originally, and then maybe add something to it about actually going and following through and reviewing the communication plan under that goal 2?
I think you need to review it first.
Yeah,
I think you guys should review it.
I think we need to thoroughly go over that, and I think we need to probably see if all the things in it are effective in 2021 and make adjustments, and then come back to goal 2 And I mean, when I looked at that, I thought the communication plan was goal 2. So, that's where I'm at. We are now at a 7-11. We have a couple more goals, but we have one other item on the agenda. I'm wondering if we can now set another, unfortunately, meeting for our annual goals to be finished, because we do have another
Well, there's
pressing
only-
matter that's on the agenda tonight. If you will agree to set another meeting and go on to the other part of our agenda tonight, which is how do we get something on the agenda?
So we have what, an hour and a half? Or an hour and what?
We've scheduled till 9 o'clock.
Okay, so I think we have plenty of time to go through
okay, I thought
the
we were-
remaining goals.
Yeah,
I
we're
thought
just
we were done at 7:30. I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, don't worry. Nobody wants to be here till 9, but we can, we do have
Okay.
the time aside, but yeah, I
All
think we
right.
could do the next 2 goals and still have time.
Okay, that's great. I'm sorry. I assumed it was 5:30 to 7:30.
Wishful thinking.
I don't know. I just regular time we do it. Goal 3, policy review. Do we want to keep this as a goal?
I think definitely it needs to be a goal. But I agree with Michelle. I think that I think that there should be some dates in there. And it could be quarterly. It could be, I mean, I think we need to at least have something. I think quarterly is probably reasonable. But I do think we should have something about that in there.
So can I say the one that I and Vice President Daniel submitted for your consideration said, number 1 said, have specific metrics for policy review. Example, reviewing X number of policies a month. That changed to subcommittee formulated expediting policy work updates. I feel like the former was a little bit more specific, but
you repeat that?
yeah. What I had suggested was have specific metrics for policy review. Example, reviewing X number of policies a month.
Can we
So,
add the 2 together? And maybe add something about a subcommittee to the original? Or would that be too much?
Well, the problem is we got a lot of our work done by June 29th, but we didn't get it adopted and didn't get it as a goal together because I was asking for meetings and on policies, and we had some issues trying to get those meetings going. So not only do we want to, I mean, the problem is I think we were making really good progress on that. And I think we have actually gone through a lot of essentials and encouraged policies. It's just kind of there's a snag in trying to get that finalized and done.
Well, we did. I mean, we set up the subcommittees last year in the 1920 school year. We did achieve that. So for 2021, which is what we're looking at now, if we went back to, using the committees that we've created last year, if we went back to having specific metrics for policy review, for example, I think you could even just say, you could simplify that and say update X amount of policies a month, and just decide what's a reasonable amount. I was talking to a board director from another district at the WASDA conference, and I think they said that they updated 4 per board meeting so they could stay on track.
And that's the thing. It's not us updating them. It's when they come back to us and then we have to go through and approve them.
Right.
So I think that's the part that we're behind on. I think we have a lot of updated policies. I think we just haven't been able to go through the process of the first reading or the second, whatever that looks like, to approve them. So if that's what and I guess that's where what are the semantics? Are we talking about the board updating them, or are we talking about the ones that have been updated by the subcommittee being presented and approved?
Mm-hmm.
Because aren't we waiting on some too to come back from WASDA from them with their recommendations?
Well, we still have a lot that where we're ready to go with, but we had
Right.
some snags.
And
Yeah.
review.
I mean,
Yeah,
I think
there's a
we've been doing a lot of good work. It's just been in finalizing it and getting it in a meeting.
Yeah,
okay.
we're nowhere close to finishing up 4,000s and 6,000s, though. We've reviewed them.
Yep.
It has to be reviewed by the board as a whole,
Right.
and so this is talking about the board as a whole
Right.
coming together for the first reading. So maybe we need to be specific and say have specific metrics for policy reviewing. Yeah, for as a board reviewing 4 policies a month or 4 policies a board meeting. I don't know.
I'm in favor of that, but trying to get all these meetings and get people there, we might
This
have
is
to.
at our regular board meeting.
Well, that's
Yeah.
regular. Yeah.
This is
Yeah,
a regular board meeting.
I think right now we have enough that the committees have reviewed
Yeah.
that to have a
Yeah.
first reading and discussion. It would have to be because the committees reviewed them. If at each board meeting we had a first reading and discussion, and then from the previous board meeting we had a second reading and approval, which could be on the consent agenda, probably. If
Well,
we'd
some
already.
of
Or
this-
subsequent. Yeah.
Mhm.
Well, but some of this also, I think we have to give consideration to Dr. Harmon and her ability to make those changes and have them available to us regularly in that way. I think I just would hesitate to say something that specific without having her input.
Mhm.
But so I don't disagree. I think, do we have to have a number? So what if we just said that we would, or, approve a policy, I don't know. I'm just wondering about the specifics of that and the ability of her to.
Oh, yeah, with the goal of reviewing, we can say with the goal of reviewing, at least 4 policies every regular board meeting. I feel like we've already in the subcommittee reviewed that. So I don't feel like, and WASDA's already reviewed it, right?
Right,
So
but the
I don't think
changes
it's a
have to be
lot.
implemented. Well, the changes have to be implemented, right? And then some of the policies, and I think even now, probably some of the ones we reviewed when we were doing it, there may be changes, but I would really like to get her input to that because she's very involved in that. And I think she could give us an exact, like I said, I just hesitate to say something so specific without having her input.
No, I appreciate that, Vice President Daniels. I actually did speak with Jewel actually yesterday and today. While our topic was not prioritized on policy, we did broach that, and she does have some. I'll just say has some good ideas on a cadence for us. So I think that will be. I think that's something that's doable. I agree. I would like for her to have that opportunity to share with the board and get your feedback on that. I just want to let you know that that's certainly something that we can do, and Dr. Harmon is more than ready to have that conversation.
So Dr. Watts, I do want to state that I
Yes.
think this, the conundrum here is that, you have said, board members need to kind of decide and get going on the board policies. That's a
Yes.
board responsibility. I do feel like we need to set some expectations. I understand Dr. Harmon's concerns,
Yes.
but to remind us, we did have a cadence, we didn't meet it. So then again, there's a question of whose responsibility is to get moving on this. And this is really primarily the board's responsibility. So we really have to have set some expectations as well.
Sure.
So I want to have a balance, I want us to get to a cadence, but I also want us to be kind of vigilant about getting things done.
Yes.
Because this has been our history. There's always some reason why this falls behind, and we got to get over that.
No, I appreciate that. We do have the 7th already slated for a policy work session that day, so that is forthcoming. But thank you. That's good to be reminded.
Well, I'm just going to, I mean, I don't want to throw anybody under the bus or anything, but we were following a plan and we were getting things done. And there was a snag in the finalization from the staff to get these meetings done and completed. So we were doing the work, we've got to
Yeah.
get, and I totally understand there's probably a lot of new responsibilities for a lot of our staff, but somehow or other, if we as a board have to be responsible for this, then we have to get it done no matter what, and that's what our community is asking us to do, to get these policies updated. And that's why I've been pushing for it. And there are a couple months that I asked for meetings and it didn't happen. So
yeah, and just as a reminder, what we did for the 1000 series is that we put in our input, we gave input, and then we met as a board and we discussed it. So that needs to happen with what we have already done as a subcommittee. And I think we have more than enough of those to last a few board meetings. So
I mean, I think our cadence at the last time we met on policies, was it helpful to others to be able to say, oh, yeah, Maya and I talked about this one, we reviewed it, and this was our recommendation in addition to Waza's recommendation. Did that help speed the process?
I don't know.
Well, we did that with the 1000 series, right? The only difference there was.
But we only discussed as a group of, I think 4 of us were there when we discussed the 1000 series. As a group, we only got through 8, and I think we approved 7 of the 8. There's one that's floating out there that I don't think we ever did finish.
So I guess my point is, I mean, to me, that's success.
Yeah.
If we did 7 out of 8. So if we've already, as a committee, met and we're going to discuss it as a group, I don't see why we need to make sure Dr. Harmon has time to make changes. I mean, we're reviewing the changes that we're suggesting, basically. And there weren't a ton of changes. I mean, I think the Clark Nuber was a big one. But beyond that, I didn't see huge changes.
Yeah.
At our side.
Well, just again, knowing what's happening and knowing what's happened with COVID, because that's really what happened, and the shutdown and the amount of attention and the amount of work that is going into that. And so that's why things didn't happen, is because everything came to a halt. And
Yeah, I appreciate
again, I just know as somebody that reviews policy also in my district, so I totally understand that there are things that have taken precedent, and it does take a little bit more time. So I'm just suggesting, again, just to get, and I think the cadence that we had, I don't know, I think it would be maybe to figure out why it stopped or what happened, because I think we just had more pressing issues that we had to deal with and it got pushed to the side, if I recall. But again, it is important. I'm just suggesting that we get her input prior to saying we want 4 policies a meeting. I just don't, I think I prefer to get the input of the staff with that, because the staff are the ones who, eventually have to go back and do the writing and do all of those things. So I think that would be.
And this is a first reading. It's not any way finalized. We're talking about what we found to be problematic, so we have a discussion as a board. That's all.
Yeah, we moved to the 2-person committee, which I thought was to eliminate the full board meetings to speed up the process. And that was suggested by the superintendent. That's why he suggested that as an option. So we ran with it to get the work, to get the initial reading done so that we could present first readings to the board. So that's how I understood that process was going to work. So Director Vengadaslam says at a board meeting, it wouldn't be anything but looking at, a first reading and a discussion. It would definitely not be an approval. It would just be, Vice President Daniels and President Hamada worked on this series, and there's 4 that they're bringing to the board meeting, and we're going to discuss them. And if we like the way they are, then they'll go on to the next board meeting with their suggested changes for approval. At the next one.
Sounds real easy. Sounds very easy. I totally get it.
Okay, so what do we want to say under goal 3, policy review?
I actually like the language that we had prior.
Not
It's more
prior.
specific.
Oops, sorry guys.
It's okay.
And could you read the prior or recall the prior language to me so I could hear it again, please?
Well, I had down have specific metrics for policy review, example, reviewing X number of policies a month.
I mean, why can't we just say review 4 policies a month? That sounds,
Didn't we want to get Dr. Harmon's input on that also? Because I mean, she has to be involved with it.
Well, 4 a month, I think is okay, because we've already reviewed way more than that.
we've got.
It's not, it's just waiting now for,
We got that
right,
covered.
for readings.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
we're waiting for readings.
I think it's but we haven't done it as a group. I mean, we haven't reviewed. I mean, yes, we have recently, but we're not doing that every month.
So what if we just say have a work session to review policy every month, and not necessarily have a number of policies, but just know that that work session is dedicated to policy review each month. We might get through 2, we might get through 20, well, not 20, but you know what I mean? We might get through 8, depending on the policy and the discussion that has to take place.
Are we talking about the extra Wednesday? Because I mean, the regular board meetings, we have 1 hour work session.
Mhm.
So
Right, but we've been
we don't
doing,
really have.
well, I'm saying we have one scheduled for next week for 3 hours, right? Or is it 2 or 3 hours for policy review?
October.
But do we
7th.
have one every
That's
month?
next Wednesday. That's
But
next. Isn't that next Wednesday?
Mhm.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So
are we setting one for every Wednesday? Because we have to put that on the calendar. We have other things on our calendar already.
And that's when you run into, issues with.
That's what I'm saying. I think it has to be dedicated. Like 2 years ago, we did every Wednesday, every other Wednesday was dedicated to policy review.
but it wasn't. It started that way,
Well,
remember?
it-
And then things started getting added to the Wednesdays, and so I think that was why we stopped.
Right. And so that's what I'm saying. We have to have some sort of dedicated, if we set this as a goal, then we'll meet it or we don't meet it.
It doesn't have to be
that was
every
our
other
goal.
Wednesday. We could just say one Wednesday a month, one work session a month. So that doesn't have to be every Wednesday. That can be one of the in-between Wednesdays or whatever that looks like. But I think we should say, I think one a month is workable.
Yeah.
Just dedicate one work session a month.
Yeah. I would, that's a very specific measurable goal. We either meet it or we don't. And it's a simple and measurable goal. Have a work session review policy each month. So, we could even set if we wanted to say the first Wednesday of every month, but
or it could be a Saturday though. We've done it on a Saturday. So if we just say one a month, we're flexible.
Right.
We just have to figure out what works.
Okay, so that wording would be acceptable to all to have a work session every month on policy.
Yes.
Okay, hey, we got something.
You did. We did. Just so you know, that 7th session, just as a reminder, that's a 2-hour session. Just FYI, right? Okay.
Okay, and how about number 2 under that? Add WASDA timeline to board calendar.
I think we had done that.
That's what didn't. Yeah, that's the cadence that.
It didn't happen. Yeah.
So then maybe we should do it. Add maybe not WASDA timeline, but add a policy timeline.
Yeah, that would be what we just discussed. We'd have to add that to the calendar. But is that a goal?
Right. So yeah, I mean, if we make so that's not really a goal. We've already added that goal to goal 1 was have a work session to add a work session every month to review policy. So so then the next goal could be, that number that we check with Dr. Harmon to find out what's a reasonable, to have X amount of first readings on, because the
I
the
agree.
accomplishment is when we have the second reading and approval.
Correct.
So, we kind of discussed at our last board meeting that these work sessions are technically the first reading,
Mhm.
And that the board meetings are the second reading. So the second goal, I think, would be the one that would be, review, talk to Dr. Harmon about to review and approve X amount of policies a month.
So add staff timeline on policy
Review and
adoption. Yeah.
There we go. Yeah, policy adoption.
Okay, so again, is that going to read add staff timeline on policy review? Is that how you want to state it?
Policy
Adoption.
adoption. Yeah.
Okay.
And then, policy adoption and implementation, because there's sometimes a lag. I know in the 1000 series, there was a lag between adopting the policy and actually implementing it. I don't know if we want to add that as a number 3 or.
Well, some of them are just updates. So a lot of them already exist. A lot of them are new policies to implement. So I think that.
Right. But like we changed our agenda policy to include the public comment portion at the beginning to accommodate for teachers and students. And there was a lag of about a month and a half between updating that policy and approving it and then actually implementing it at our board meetings. So I guess, but really, if you think about it, it's only the 1000 series that we need to make sure we're implementing. The other series are what Clark Nuber was talking about, that staff, and their procedures related to the updates of policies.
So do I hear we want to add or we don't want to add, or we're still in limbo on that?
For a timeline?
Or the implement. I don't necessarily think we need to add that because we don't implement a lot of policy.
Mm-hmm.
Other thoughts? So I still don't understand. Do we want to add it or not? What's the majority?
I think just, so goal 2 is add staff policy adoption. Is that goal 2 or KPI 2?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
And we're not going to address the other part of it, correct?
I think so.
Correct.
Okay. Speak up if you don't agree. All right. Anything else under policy review?
And also keep in mind implementation is operations, and that's not our.
That's not
Yep.
us.
Well, some of them are us. The 1000 series are us. But that's the only one. That's why I backed off on that.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay.
Maya, I missed that. What did you say? I'm sorry.
Oh, no, I was just clarifying implementation is really the district's purview.
Oh,
but,
okay.
But the 1000 series is correct. It's
Right.
the board.
Ours.
Okay.
Okay, go for it.
All right. Anything else under policy review, or we're moving on to goal 4? Annual calendar. How do we feel about that? The board annual agenda plan is a fluid document that currently includes presentations, reports, resolutions, general operating business, and recognitions, special meetings, superintendent evaluation dates, budget evaluation dates, school closures for holidays and breaks, and graduation. Any pertinent information needed to complete the board's work. Do we feel that needs to be on them?
I think the one thing that's missing is the date. So we need to say it needs to be established by whatever that looks like. I think if we put a date
before
in
the
there,
school year begins.
yeah, it's got to be before the school year. So if we put a date on there, I think that's pretty complete.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
That's just my thought. That's just my thought.
Established by September, established by first day of school, or?
No, it's got to be, so it usually happens prior. So we establish the board calendar for the upcoming year.
July, August.
So it would be like June, July, somewhere in there. We voted, well, no, I think, yeah, I thought we had established before.
No, it was August last year.
Yeah,
Was it August? Okay.
typically
And
it's
we
that,
just had
it's
our
in the summer.
calendar meeting and
It
we
is the
haven't
summer?
even,
Okay.
yeah. And
Yeah.
so we've already
Really.
missed that goal because we just had our calendar
Yep,
meeting.
we have.
And the one thing I would say is, again, when we talk about roles, there's two different pieces of that calendar. There's the things that fall under the how, and it's, things like that. But there's also things that fall under the board, which is evaluating the superintendent and things like that. And those are the things that I didn't see on the calendar. And, we came up when we talked about that with Trisha Luback on the 16th, she said, it seems like the things that are on the calendar are the things that are getting done and that we self-evaluated ourselves more highly. But there are a lot of the operational stuff that get on the calendar. So again, I don't feel comfortable with the calendar yet because there's things that aren't on there, like the dates for the superintendent's evaluation, like the dates for our next board self-evaluation, things like that.
So I want to chime in on this one because in December 2019, when we met as a board, I know Dr. Watts and Vice President Daniels were unable to make it. We had a discussion on the calendar and we talked about this particular calendar, that it is something that the board has to initiate. This is not the responsibility of the district. It is, of course, the responsibility of the district to come to us and tell us, what are the presentations and when that's going to happen and what's the best time for it to happen. But in terms of what the board's work is, that's our responsibility. That's not something that Dr. Watts is going to tell us, this is when you have your board goals meeting, when you have. So I had suggested, that we look at the calendar that was already in draft form that Karen Howley had already prepared. And there are holes there. There are Wednesdays when there aren't any meetings, when we have time. It's up to the board to review that. And the way we would do it is, two people meet together and kind of come up with what should be plugged in, looking at community conversations and all of that. And then we meet as a board to look at it and agree upon how we want to move forward. So that didn't happen. We didn't set up those times that needed to happen for board goals and superintendent goals, evaluation, et cetera. So this coming year, this particular goal, annual calendar, by the way, is not even really a goal. It's saying is what it is. What is the agenda plan? There's no specific goal there. What had suggested in there is saying annual calendar must be completed before addressing the above. So that was the suggestion as to, setting a goal of when we get that done. The process itself, it has to be initiated by the board. It just can't be left to the district to set a board calendar. So I would say, as Vice President Daniel said, should we make that very specific and say annual calendar must be completed before the start of school or July, July or August. And then as a step two, it may change, but the crux of what we need on there would be there. That is the semi-annual, evaluations, what we said in goal number 1. Those are specific dates that we have to meet, as well as a policy review. We have to meet that one Saturday or one weekday for policy review every month. So those are dates that the 2 board members can sit together and work through and plug in based on, just a draft calendar of what happened this year. Look at that, and that'll sort of translate into next year as well, the majority of it.
So to get clarity, because I keep copious notes. So on December 19th, we talked about the KPIs for the superintendent, and we talked about the policy work, because I have those documents in my notebook here. I don't recall seeing a draft calendar until
we didn't.
our February 1st. And I
Yeah,
don't
we didn't
even,
have a draft.
and I didn't even write down any notes about a calendar. So I'm a little confused about that being on the 19th because it's not even in, I don't think it's even in my notes. I could be wrong, but I'll review them
Yeah.
because I don't remember even talking about a calendar until February 1st. Because in my
Yes,
notes for
so-
February 1st is when we talked about the calendar. But again, I think the clarity wasn't there about that it's initiated by the board, because then so the calendar that we sat down and talked with Dr. Harmon, were that something we were supposed to initiate, or is that initiated by the superintendent and his team to show us what has to happen in those timeframes?
Yeah, those are the requirements that the district has to provide to the board. Some are requirements, some are staff wanting to present information to the board as priority, like capital planning, those sort of things. Because we have new school that's coming up, there are going to be some things that staff will want to present to the board. But these particular things that involve our board goals, that's not something that the superintendent is going to set up.
Right. And I guess I didn't even think that. I guess I thought maybe that was a confusion, because when we sat down with Dr. Harmon and we were looking at, I understand that the superintendent would show us the hows and all the things that had to happen. But I guess I thought that was our opportunity to sit down as a board and say, oh, let's get these other things on the calendar. So I guess when we had that session, again, it was unclear to me. I thought that's when we were going to also add things like the superintendent evaluation and things like that. So I think I tried to bring up. So now it all is starting to make sense to me. Why?
Well, the problem is, that presentation was done in an Excel format. It's not a calendar. So how do we even know what's open? What are the dates that are open? You have to sit down and walk through this, with a draft calendar, which
didn't we create
Karen,
a draft calendar?
Yeah.
We did. Okay, that's what I thought, because we had a draft calendar that Karen handed out to everyone.
Yeah.
I got that on February 1st.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. And well, it came to you February 1st, but Karen and I talked to the board about that, because what happens is that nothing is going to happen until we have a calendar. We're not going to move. We're not going to have, everything is laid out there. So this is not an onboarding issue. This is an issue of board coming together and setting priorities for the entire board. Well, the board president and another board member will start, but then, with that, we have to come to the entire board and discuss it, because things are going to change. Staff will come with priorities. So it's not going to stay, but some of those key things like superintendent evaluation, board goals review, all those things have to happen within a certain period of time. And so there may be a few changes in terms of which week it is, but typically it does remain, and Karen does work with us on those. So we're going to have to now go back to that draft calendar. That information that Dr. Harmon presented will need to get entered into our regular annual calendar. And then we have to see where are the holes there and plug these dates in.
Yeah. So and I haven't seen the finalized version of that Excel spreadsheet.
Yeah, that takes time. That is one of the issues. I pretty much started, both my years I initiated those discussions, because, if we wait on staff, they have so much to do that it's just, it's a tough thing to get done.
So, but we can assume that, just based on that meeting we had, that regular board meetings are typically, the work sessions are typically filled with presentations and things like that. So really, if we know logically, if we know the when our regular board meeting nights are, the second and the fourth Wednesdays of each month, unless it's a month with a holiday like November or December. Realistically, we know that the other Wednesdays at least are open. And we kind of discussed that on Saturday the 12th, that a lot of us just automatically keep Wednesday nights open in case a meeting comes up. And then some Saturdays, maybe quarterly or whatever. So realistically, even without that spreadsheet, we do know, when the technically open Wednesdays are.
Yeah, but we did talk about Vice President Daniels being part of that discussion, because I know you have Saturdays or.
Well,
Wednesday.
and that was, again, one of the things that we talked about with regards to, like, when we have a student, right, the frequency of our meetings. And so thinking about, I think the first year I was here, we met at least usually once, sometimes mostly twice. I mean, it was a lot. And so just thinking about the frequency of our meetings, and the board has to agree on what's on, the schedule, that, so when we all sit down and talk about it, someone might not be able to meet every Wednesday. It just depends on what that looks like. So that's why we ask, that's why you put out kind of a feeler to say, hey, does this work if we're adding something outside of the regular scheduled meetings? It's just kind of, does this work for you, or what does that look like? Or so.
Well,
Yeah.
I do recall that we had a conversation, not sure, but it was recently, that we agreed that we would keep Wednesdays to do some of our work, and that we were only going to meet, and we agreed as a board, one Saturday a month, if at all, that was the limit that I wrote down. So,
Okay.
I remember that.
So, I mean, I thought that was a general understanding going forward. So, okay.
I appreciate that. I am actually, it's hard to multitask, but I know that we had this conversation, and Dr. Harmon had your, let's see, when is the last time? I think you were all in your team sites and staff link. Just FYI, I believe, well, I can't locate it specifically.
The agenda.
Dr. Harmon had, so the draft calendar that you were discussing, that is in the Board of Directors team site.
Right.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So at this point, you're saying that myself and Vice President Daniel should go back and plug in all those open dates that are still there?
It can be any board member. It doesn't have to be both of us, but I'm happy to do it. I'm just saying it could be any board member. It doesn't necessarily have to be, but we could do that and then bring it to the board.
And that's just the process that we have. That's the that's the process we have right now.
Okay, that's what I'm searching for. Okay, that's very clear.
That makes sense to have the board president and vice president plug in those other board work things and then present to the board.
Yeah.
Okay, we've got our marching orders, Vice President Daniel.
I mean, it makes sense to me that.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So what?
Going back to our goal.
Yeah. Yeah.
So now that we've had the full calendar discussion.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, a lot of this stuff, I personally just didn't know. And, even going back to, the communication plan, I felt the same way. 2018, 2019 plan, I didn't assume that it was still going on. So I'm learning a lot of new stuff tonight. I mean, I'm going to be making a list for myself again for my, manual I'm creating to help onboard anyone new, because a lot of this stuff is new and wasn't intuitive really for me. So when we look at the annual calendar goal, so I like what what Maya said about, completing it by the start of the school year.
Yeah, I think that would be very helpful. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but we really have had some unprecedented times right now, and it's affected everybody. So, yeah.
So just changing that sentence then to say the board annual agenda plan will be completed by, or maybe at the end of that sentence, to be completed by before the new school year. I like the end of the school year. That was what I thought. But if you wanted to just, that might be too much with budget and all the other stuff.
Mhm.
So we
I-
could do
I
summer.
like before the beginning of the new school year personally.
Okay, so then that could go right before annual. Where would that go? Just to add it to that sentence to make it the timeline.
Yeah, because that last sentence is not really a sentence. Any pertinent information
Right.
needed to complete the board's work. Yeah. So we can just say annual calendar must be completed.
Prior to the beginning of the upcoming school year.
Yes.
So would it have all the other presentations, reports, etc.? Would that all be spelled out, or would it just say the board annual agenda plan will be completed before the beginning of the school year?
No,
I think if you're a community
okay.
member, remember
Mhm.
we were talking, if a community member looks at that, then they would know what's on that plan.
Yeah. Okay.
So I think it should stay.
Because I get a little confused because general operating business and recognitions was what was on that calendar from before. So that we saw before, which is under the purview of,
but that's
the
not
operations.
Yeah, that wasn't the agenda. That wasn't the complete agenda plan. There's the calendar itself, we had some dates on there as to when, which board meetings those things will come, but you want to actually see a calendar.
Well, because it's like, when we talk about it, because we're not deciding the recognitions, as far as I'm aware, that hasn't fallen under our purview. I know we had a little discussion about it then.
Well, all this is that it's a fluid document that currently includes.
Yeah.
It doesn't say we dictate, when that happens. It's just a document that it is good to put fluid. That's for sure.
It is very fluid.
It'll be fluid.
It's very fluid. Yeah.
Yeah, and just, I think you just covered it, but I want to make sure I understand, like if something would come up that was pressing that we hadn't thought about, we could also, plug that in if we could find a place, right?
That's why it's fluid. Yep.
Okay. Just want to ask the question, make sure I understand. All right. Anything else we want to add to this?
Should we add a mid-year review of this annual calendar?
I think we look at it, well, in my past, we look at it all the time. So as things get added to it. So just like this year, it's kind of when something comes up, we kind of say, okay, is this available for everybody? And it gets added to it. So I don't know. I feel like we look at it all the time, but that's just.
So Denise, you and I need to, get together and set a date probably. I'm sure your schedule is more full than mine. So let's do that sooner rather than later, okay?
Absolutely.
Okay. Was there any other goals or anything else other than we have to go back and circle back to the number?
Communication plan.
Yeah. Is there anything else we want to add to this or any more conversation about what we've done here?
My only conversation is when are we going to have our meeting when are we going to finalize the communication goals?
I think the plan, you guys, I would suggest everyone review the plan first.
Yeah.
When is our next ESGT?
That might be a good time to have it.
And we have task force.
And for right now, we could actually just put on there, review communication plan and come back to, if you want to put something on there, because that's what we're doing at this point.
Oh, we could complete it and adjust it. Yeah, we could adjust it.
Absolutely.
Well, I'm just saying, I know there's concern about the goals not being.
I hear you.
So we could just add to review the communication plan.
An update if necessary.
An update. Well, I think it will be necessary, but definitely an update by a certain time or whatever that looks like. So that way we at least have it's on here that we did address it, right?
And that, it looks like with all the measures of that communication plan, it's a pretty big KPI, honestly.
Yeah, yeah.
So the BSGT for my goals is set for October 21st. That's the most recent, or
That's 3 weeks. I think that's good time to finish reviews.
So, I mean, review and update. So if we just agree that goal 2 communication plan just has one KPI, review and update current communication plan by, November 1st or something, or November 15th, or, I mean, I'm just picking an arbitrary day, but
I think that makes sense.
do you want to say
by our board date in November?
Yeah, I think that would be good, the board date in November. Does anybody know when it is?
Is it 11th or 16th?
That's a good question.
I have to look at a calendar.
I have one. That would be November 11th.
Yeah.
Okay.
So is it possible to have our work session on November 11th, even though it's a regular meeting date? Would it be possible to have us have our discussion and to...
If I may, that's Veterans Day.
it is, yeah, I was gonna say it's a holiday.
This
The
year.
11th
Yes.
is a Wednesday.
So there's no
It's
board
a
meeting?
Wednesday this year.
There's
Yep.
no meeting
it
on
is
our
a Wednesday
calendar.
this year.
Mhm.
Oh.
So there's no meeting, no regular board meetings for the month of November?
No, November 11th.
That's what I said, the 11th. But you guys are saying the Veterans Day is on Wednesday?
It is.
Oh, so then
So we don't have a
we
regularly
wouldn't have
scheduled...
one on the 18th or the 4th then.
We could have a work session.
We could have a work session, but not on Veterans Day.
If I could interrupt, it's scheduled for November 18th. The
Oh,
board
Yes,
meeting is.
thank you.
There you go.
Our
Sorry.
regular, so our
It's on the
reg
18th.
Thank you.
so by November 18th, we would review and update the current plan by November 18th. Is that the goal then?
Well, I thought we said for BSGT, we would have reviewed which is October, whenever, Dr. Watts, he gave us a date.
The 21st, that's a Wednesday.
So we're
Yeah.
doing Dr. Watt's goals on that day.
Yeah, we're doing Dr. Watts' goals on that date.
Oh, okay.
October 21st, correct.
Okay, so you're saying there's no time to have, yeah, there probably won't be time.
Yeah.
October 20, unless October 28th is open.
I thought we had something on
We
October.
have a regular board meeting and
Oh,
work
that's right.
session scheduled. Mhm.
Right.
Yeah,
So
So it would have to be November 4th or November 18th.
This is why we have to look at the regular calendar.
Mhm.
So correct me if I'm wrong, what are we updating on the 4th or the 8th? I've lost train here.
The
So the-
communication plan.
Yeah, so the
Okay.
so the goal 2 would just have the KPI of review and update current communication plan by X date.
I think we can. I think if we said by end of this calendar year, I think
Okay.
that would be more reasonable,
That makes sense.
because it's going to take a while. I know,
Yeah.
Melissa, we had
That-
a lot of
yeah,
discussion.
that's a big, just perusing it. Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
lot. Yeah.
Well, I mean, that's why we might only want to have one KPI because it's a big.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Review and update. Review and
President Hamada, directors, if I can add a little bit of context to that, just as a
Sure.
reminder too. The board communications plan that we co-wrote together is actually based and rooted in the district communications plan, which is aligned to the strategic plan, which is aligned to superintendent board goals and KPIs. So those are all connected. And there was a lot of exchange and a lot of input from the board, and it did take some time. But once we got there at the end of the year for the following year, there were monthly reports provided that I provided on all the main indicators. Even if not in person, I provided them in a monthly report on the metrics within within that time frame each month on everything from video views of sessions as we decided how much we were going to pay for board recordings to until we made a decision on thought exchange. And so it just kind of depended. So it's definitely think that there's time. I think it will be important. We've been finalizing our district communications plan. So I think the alignment between the two will be important, but that work has also been put off and shifted due to COVID. So we've done it a little bit later this year, so it can also be responsive to COVID. So I think those two things should go hand in hand, and so I'll work with Dr. Watts to get that to you as well.
Perfect.
I think, watching some of those videos we've gone into a lot of detail on those communication plans over the course of the last year at our work sessions. So they're all recorded. And that might be helpful.
And so then have we set a date to review that?
End of the calendar year.
End of
By
calendar
the end
year.
of the calendar year.
Okay. All right.
So
I
the
lost that.
So the communication plan goal has one KPI of review and update current communication plan by end of calendar year 2020.
Okay.
Is
So
that right?
Yes.
Sounds good.
So do I hear we've actually finalized these?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So I'm going to close this out and we're going to move on, right?
I
Should we have more?
can't believe it, but we are. We're
No, I
now.
didn't see any document around. I saw the document that Dr. Watts sent around setting agenda items.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. I don't.
I said that it was board meeting evening. It was just a link to a
Right. Yes. Okay.
governance site.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely.
So this is something I guess we could just discuss, though, right?
Yeah. So again, it's just I've brought this up because it is unclear to me how to get items on the agenda. And like I said, when I looked at, the WASDA work and the board's responsibilities and the superintendent's responsibilities and goals, I feel like, people are asking things to be on the agenda that are perfectly reasonable. And I would like to be able to support my board directors in the items they want on the agenda. So it's important to me that everyone, we all represent our community and we all represent constituents that we're hearing. So it's just having a procedure and a process that is, understandable and is clear to all involved, so we know how we get things on the agenda. So and thinking about this, and looking at other districts, some districts, it's just a new items business and a board director might say, hi, I want to have an agenda item at our next meeting where we discuss, painting all the fire hydrants at our schools with art so that, for the art classes. So, and then it's like, I make a motion that at our next meeting, we have a discussion on, having an art project of fire hydrants at all the schools. And then in public, the board, then it's like I second, we have a discussion and it either is agreed upon by the board and gets on the next agenda or it isn't. That's one way to do it. It could be during the 2x2 agenda reviews. I feel like those are pretty fair and evenly spaced out. It could be in email to the superintendent or the board and the board president, since they are responsible in policy. So there's options that I've looked at. It could be a form. It could be anything. It could be, just adding new things to the agenda review. But there needs to be a procedure so it's understandable. So, I just look back in my notes and here it is. I asked for a Core 24 update since since January of 2020 and before. I know I did ask even before I was on the board when that was going to come up because I kept looking for it. So I just went through all my emails and notes this weekend, and it's just like, there's things that, it's like, is it reasonable that, that I've been asking since January in email 3 or 4 times if we were going to have a Core 24 report, and it's now almost October. Tomorrow's October, and it hasn't made it to the agenda. So I want to understand and create a procedure.
Yeah.
I like the actual email that Dr. Watson sent out us, and I read that through. I think it might be helpful us again to develop a system where we have a form that we fill it out and have it dated and have it reviewed and then placed on the calendar. I think that might help us a lot of having some type of a system. I'm into systems, so.
Let me ask this, during your agenda setting meetings, Director Bencher, because I know you've participated in some, you have the ability to say, to suggest, I would like to put this on the agenda. So has it been brought up during your agenda setting?
Yes, before my very first agenda setting meeting, which actually happened to be with you, I sent an email saying, in looking at our meeting, here's some things that I'd be interested to add into the agenda. And you actually sent me an email saying that the whole board has to approve what goes on the agenda.
I said the whole board has to approve what goes on the agenda?
Yes, you said I feel like the whole board needs to look at these items to put them on the agenda. So then I was under the impression that agenda setting meetings 2x2s were not when the board put things on, and it was based solely on your email that you sent me.
So I'm assuming that it sounds like you had a list of items that you wanted on the agenda. So that in that case, I would probably have said, yeah, that's probably something the board should look at. If you have a list of multiple items, which it's sounding like.
I wanted community updates from the strategic planning committee and things like that, committees that we hadn't heard from.
So that makes sense, because when we set our calendar, we would set space to say, if we want those types of updates and presentations, that's a calendar setting thing that we would do.
Okay,
so that does
and
make
again,
sense.
that
makes sense.
note was not explained to me as being a
Got it.
calendar setting into. I just got an email and it was just like, that's the whole board has to decide on that. And
Okay.
so with no further explanation. So to me, in saying, trying to be respectful and say, here's some ideas I have for agenda items, and then have it said, no, the whole board has to decide. I was like, okay, well, with no other context, to me, that means you don't add agenda items during the 2x2 agenda review.
Okay. The way that I've done it, because I asked about this when I first was on the board, and I had asked, and so what I would do if there was something, well, what I was told, and I can't remember if it was Maya or because I was kind of concerned about the same thing. I'm like, well, how does the board get things on the agenda? And if I'm not mistaken, I would send an email or make a suggestion to whoever was doing the agenda setting to say, would it be possible to put this on the next agenda? I can't remember if I sent an email. Maya, do you remember? Because we did have a process. It wasn't in writing though, and it's pretty informal, I guess, too.
Well, no, I've always understood you just talk to the superintendent and the president, and we don't dictate. It just at the 2x2, so you make that suggestion, right? Because you're not there. If you're not there, you have to email or something. I mean, how else does someone know about it?
Right.
So I don't.
And also thinking about what is going on. So I was thinking about your example, Michelle, and I think part of the challenge is sometimes the agenda items require a lot of prep from staff or prep to actually respond to the agenda item. And if they're already prepared to present on something for that next meeting, they might not be able to be prepared to present on it. So I think the timeline, depending on what the request is, might be something we need to take into consideration as well.
Right.
But,
well, even
I do.
Yeah, but even, I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead.
But even knowing that, I mean, the Core 24 committee ended their work, and it was supposed to be, I mean, it's on the website that it was supposed to be presented to the board in, I think November is the date it says there. And so to start asking about it in December, and it's now almost October, one day from October, it's like, how long does one wait to get an item on the agenda? So I guess to me, maybe what President Hamada was saying is if there's a form and then the form comes back and it's like, well, this is going to take some time, or, you know, this isn't something we could do, or that committee doesn't meet, et cetera, then it's clear. You know, if I had even gotten a response saying, you know, heck no, you're never going to get that. I mean, something is just it.
Well, if you read this, actually I've read a couple, but the one that Dr. Watts sent this link to, the form asks some pretty pointed questions about it. And then the superintendent and the president go over all this. And if it, you know, and if it looks fairly easy to do, and we have the staff ready and prepared to do it, and it's a system, we can date it, we can show it, and we have a trail about when it was asked for and what were the results. And if by some chance it takes more staff preparation to do this properly, to bring it up, then we can provide that and say, this is a great idea, but we need another month or so or a couple weeks to get that together. You would have a trail, and then you'd feel like you were heard, as far as I can see.
Yeah, I also liked it. I was going to point that out to those 3 items. I think it's good for us to have some sort of a process. This issue has never really come up, as far as I know. I can never remember a board member saying my agenda never got to the, you know, to the board. So there wasn't a process even when I was not at the president, because I felt like, you know, my agenda items would always get on. So if we're looking for something that's written up, and yes, I'm all for process oriented. I like it too. I like the way it reads. It's simple, and it also aligns with policies too, and what is the issue, the specific policy that it addresses.
Right.
I sort of like that, because that is our role. And so how does this fit in? That takes the personalization out of it, and it goes into our board business, you know, our board goals. So maybe we want to set up a category of, you know, which board goal does this fit into? Because it should address board goals. So that strategic plan monitoring, you know, core 24 would have fit into that particular part of her board goal.
And I'm perfectly willing to work with Dr. Watts and staff to do a rough draft of a form and bring it back and see if everybody approves of it, and try to do it as soon as possible, if that's agreeable with everybody.
That's good. Great.
Yes.
Yeah,
Now,
it's
I
just,
can certainly work with staff too to see how simple or not so simple, just to see what the operationalization of this looks like. And I'd be happy to bring back any reports or ahas or wondering. So
Yeah, because there is sometimes that our executive assistant has pointed out that, you know, there's a reason here or there why that can't happen to me or something. I've learned that by that.
Sure.
So that's great. But
let's take a look at it. We can do that and see how
And
easy or not, and make any adjustments that we need.
And let's give ourselves a deadline to have a rough draft by, I don't know, next week. Is that too progressive for you, Dr. Watts?
By end of next week, we can work through that.
All
If
right.
not, I'll let you know, but let's plan for that. So a week from, by no later than a week from this Friday, that would put us at,
Yeah, and what is that date? Do you have a
The
calendar?
9th. It's the 9th.
night.
Okay. By the 9th, we'll have a rough draft. Okay, we did something. We did a lot tonight. I'm tremendously impressed. Is there anything else before we conclude tonight? All right, then I'm going to call us adjourned, and all of you be safe and well. Thanks for tuning in, everybody.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank
Take
you.
care.
Well done. Have a good night. Be safe.
good
All
night.
right.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.